Is that loud? Is that too loud? Is that okay? All right. Good evening, everybody. How are we all doing? Wow, good. Good energy. All right, I love it already. So welcome, everybody. My name is Ray Andrade. I am LMU's graduate alum who now became LMU's librarian for student engagement. So on behalf of the entire team at your William H. Hannon Library, welcome. Welcome to Faculty Pub Night, February edition. So for tonight's Faculty Pub Night, we're going to feature Dr. Shaun Anderson, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies, and Dr. Anderson will discuss his recent publication entitled The African American Community and Professional Baseball, Examining Major League Baseball's Corporate Social Responsibility Efforts as a Relationship Management Strategy. So before I bring up a special guest to formally introduce tonight's speakers, just a couple of fun facts about Faculty Pub Night. So number one, especially students, hopefully you figured out it's not for faculty only. All right, so please tell your friends. So it's called Faculty Pub Night, but it's open to everybody. Secondly, yes, it's a pub night event, but it is not 21 and it's not a 21 and over event. So my friend Eric, the bartender, is checking IDs. Sup, Eric? So he's gonna check IDs. So please don't waste your time trying to be slick to score a drink. All right. All right, and then secondly, the format of the event is totally chill. So if you get hungry or thirsty at any point, please feel free to get some food and drink and bring it back to your chair at any point. Also, on your chairs, you should have noticed a feedback form modeled by Dean Chris Brancolini of the library. Thank you, Chris. So if you could please fill out that feedback form, that'll let us improve our programming. And if you also include your email address at the bottom of that floor, if you include your email address, you would be entered into a raffle for a $100 Amazon gift card, which might come in handy for something. So lastly, if you have any questions, we're going to ask that you please hold your questions until the end when we have a Q&A segment for the event. All right? So without further ado, now I would like to welcome Dr. Craig Rich, Associate Professor and Interim Chair of Communication Studies.
Good evening, everyone. It is both my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Shaun Anderson. Earning his PhD from West Virginia University, where he received the prestigious W.E.B. Du Bois Fellowship, Dr. Anderson joined Loyola Marymount University in 2016. Since then, to put it simply, he has thrived. Dr. Anderson is an assistant professor of organizational communication in the Communication Studies Department and a faculty advisor for the Institute of Business Ethics and Sustainability. His teaching and research interests center on the effective use of corporate social responsibility within and outside organizations, particularly sports organizations. He's published in top-notch journals including the Psychology of Popular Media Culture, the International Journal of Sport Communication, and Communication in Sport. In addition, his work has been featured in popular press outlets such as the Huffington Post, Medium.com, Western City Magazine, and WorldPolicy.org. He's an advisor for the PBS television series Xavier Riddle and the Secret Museum, which was nominated for an Addy Award. Also, he has worked with organizations such as Football University, Major League Baseball, Nine Media, PBS, and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. In 2018, he was named a Black Enterprise Magazine Modern Man of Distinction for his commitment to teaching and scholarship. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Anderson.
Okay, I'm going to adjust this a little bit if you don't mind. No, it's fine. There we go. All right, so you probably still hear me anyway. So I'm going to take it as a compliment, okay, that you're here with me tonight instead of driving in traffic, okay, on the way home, because I got to drive in traffic once we leave here. So thank you, Craig, for introducing me. Thank you all for being here. Once again, my name is Shaun Anderson, and I'm an assistant professor here at LMU in the Comm Studies Department. My office is over there where the fountain is, you know. I sometimes think, like, if I'm too tired some days, I hope I don't trip into that fountain. But it's all good. So thank you again for being out here tonight to listen to my research presentation. And the focus is on the African-American experience in Major League Baseball. Now, this particular study actually stems from my dissertation work. So this particular study is the first study that came out of that dissertation, and there are subsequent studies that I'm working on right now. And so whereas you can see Chris Rock will be somewhat of a theme throughout this presentation because he calls himself, at the moment, the self-proclaimed only black baseball fan. Okay? And so to get things kicked off, I wanted to talk a little bit about my background. So in this picture, this lovely, lovely, blurry picture, this is, to the left, it's my family. So my grandfather and my grandmother are the ones that are sitting down. My two older sisters are the ones standing in the background. The baby that my grandfather is holding is my cousin. He and I are still in competition. And that little ball of joy that my grandmother is holding, that's me. Okay? And so the person with the little child also at the bottom right corner is my mother. And that's also me, I think, at the age of 2. And so I grew up in rural Arkansas, okay? And so rural Arkansas, this city called Pine Bluff, approximately 30,000 people. So you can imagine the difference between here and where I grew up. And so I played football for most of my life, and I actually played baseball a little bit. But I played, and I had the dreams and the goals of becoming a professional football player. And but in high school, and not to gross you out, but I have to tell this story because I kind of like telling it now. Back then, I couldn't tell it. In high school, I was getting all of the scholarship offers to play at like major SEC schools, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I was going in for a tackle, and the opponent's helmet hit my kneecap. Yeah, and tore it right off. So I was in shock, I think, for about the first 5 minutes until I looked at my knee, and it was just turning black. And only thing I can hear my mom from the stand, she was like, "Can you move your toes? Can you move your toes?" You know, and I was like, I just started moving them, and so I knew, nothing was like too broken. So as you can imagine, that was the end of my football playing career. So I had to have surgery on that knee, and the doctors basically said that if I wanted to play, I would run the risk of eventually losing my leg if I continued playing. So, of course, had to find different means. And so I went to the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff for my undergrad degree. And also, as you can imagine, with that injury, all of the scholarship offers went away. So I paid my way through college by working as a janitor for about 3 years. All right? Full-time janitor, full-time college student, just around the clock working. And so eventually, I went on to get my master's degree from Arkansas State University. Both degrees were in communication, so public relations, that sort of area. Then I worked for a few years and then went on to pursue my PhD from West Virginia University, where I met my wife. And so that's how I had the connection to LA, because she's from LA. And so what happened was when we were reaching the last part of the time there, she was like, "I'm tired of Morgantown. I'm going home, and you're coming with me." And so I said, okay. So here I come. So I visited LA for a little bit, and I was like, all right, I like this. I like this Korean barbecue. Never heard of it. But it was wonderful. That hooked me. So I was thankful to get the position here. I got the notification in April of 2016 that I was hired here, moved here in June of 2016, and the rest is history. All right. So been here for, at the end of this semester, it'll be 4 years. That was me on my graduation day. I like to do stuff like that, so forgive me. But that's a little bit of background about me. So again, I played sport, and from that time where I got hurt up until now, I've always had an interest in understanding sport from this sort of communicative, sociological perspective. Why do we engage ourselves in sport? How can sport help communities? Things of that nature. So as I say, I grew up in rural Arkansas, and I gave you a little hint, but I want to ask you all a question. What do you think is the most dominant sport in the South? Football. Yeah. So you're talking about a massive, massive move to play football if you're in the South, okay? So if you don't play football, you're ostracized, plain and simple. You know, you don't have friends. People push you to the side. You know, and if you're interested in any other sport, it's a done deal. You know, you're going to be just left in the back of the class or something all the time. No one is going to talk to you. But that's the way things roll in the South. So even right now, there's this show on the Esquire network called Friday Night Tykes. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's simply a show that looks at this growing Pee Wee football league in Texas, okay? And you're talking about intense practices, coaches yelling at these kids to like, as if they're playing in the pros right now, okay? And the issue with that is recent research has shown that little kids, even at the ages of 8 and 9, are now beginning to suffer from concussion-like symptoms, right? And so over the last couple of years, you're beginning to see a lot of NFL players retire early because of too many injuries, too much stress to the body. And in particular, there was this one player, he was really great at baseball, but he was also really great at football. His name was Antoine Randall. He, a couple of years ago, was getting dementia. It started because of his just the constant hits that he took in playing the sport. And so he would tell his wife that, I just wish I would have played baseball. You know, at least I wouldn't be in this situation. But what is baseball to the African American community, right? In the South, it's football or nothing. Basketball, you know, you might get a couple of friends, you know what I'm saying, but football and hockey and NASCAR, oh no. Nothing that we understand. Okay? But my grandfather, and I mentioned my family at the beginning of this piece because my grandfather was a very smart man, him and my grandmother. But they both had only 8th grade educations. Okay, but some of the smartest people you would ever meet. And so he would always talk about growing up in Mississippi, Shaun, Mississippi. I don't even know where that is. I just know what Mississippi is. But he always talked about baseball, the Negro Leagues, and being a fan of baseball as a whole. And so if you know anything else about Arkansas, we don't have any pro teams. The Arkansas Razorbacks, the college team, is basically the pro team. And so all of the surrounding states that had pro teams, you know, we essentially became fans of, okay? And so one team in particular that my grandfather would always talk about and he would be a fan of are the St. Louis Cardinals. I see you've got some St. Louis Cardinals fans here. And so I remember him talking about these two players in particular. And if you don't know who they are, the top left is Willie McGee, and the bottom right is the Wizard that they called him, Ozzie Smith. He was called the Wizard because he was just spectacular when it came to defensive strategy. And he would always come out onto the field when it was time for them to play defense, and he would give like a flip. And it was very entertaining. And my grandfather would rave about it all the time. He would tell my older sister, go and get me a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit from McDonald's and bring it to me so I could watch my baseball, all the time. He would do this. And I would just sit with him and partake in watching these games as well. And so Willie McGee, Ozzie Smith, all of these players, Darryl Strawberry, some of these prominent black players who were dominating baseball in, I would say, the early to mid 80s, began to eventually fade away. Okay? So the game was shifting. We started to see this decline of African American players within the game of baseball. Why? Okay, and we'll get into that in a second. But as I say, towards the beginning of the 90s, you saw this steep decline. And so Major League Baseball began to recognize that many of the minority players and fans were leaving. So they established this program actually here in Compton called Reviving Baseball in Inner Cities, okay, which was a program that's still being utilized today to really show young children and any adults who are interested or who may be interested in the game that the game is actually exciting and it's fun for them to participate in, okay? So again, they introduced this back in 1989, and there are still issues today, all right? So, Chris Rock, I'm sure as you can see that picture, you can hear that voice of his right now, right? In a 2015 interview with HBO, Chris Rock did this little mini documentary, like a 6-minute documentary, that basically said that black people in baseball just don't match anymore, okay? And he went on to talk about, again, his fandom with baseball, but when he goes to the games, he's the only person that's there of his hue, as he always likes to mention. And so he went on to talk about how baseball is the only sport that plays the right way, and that's a bad thing. Okay? And what he means by that is that other sports have evolved, all right, according to society. For the longest, for years, baseball used to be the entertainment hub of the United States, and that's not the case anymore, okay? Because we've seen the rise of these other sports. But essentially, he says that he's going to keep going to games, but he doesn't know if black people will ever migrate back to it. Okay? So why is that? Okay? The rise of the NFL and the NBA, all right, for starters. These are some of the main reasons as to why baseball is declining. All right. When in the early 80s, hip-hop culture began to dominate society, all right? And the NFL and the NBA latched on to that. And so because the NBA and the NFL latched on to what was popular in the culture at that time, you started seeing people migrate to the games. And as such, because the NFL and the NBA became more focused on the advent of technology, showcasing their games more and more, seeing their popularity rise, so began the demise of baseball as a whole relative to viewership. Okay? Because of the popularity of the NBA as well, you began to see this one and done phenomenon. Okay? to where these college basketball players would go play 1 year and go on and play in the NBA, all right, which made the game that much more exciting. Even to the point to where you could leave straight out of high school to go play in the NBA. Now, they brought the one and done phenomenon back because they were just trying to prevent athletes who were not ready to go into the NBA to not go. But that's going to go away eventually too, because again, the game is becoming that much more popular. Next, the entertainment value is not up to par. Okay? With the rise of hip-hop culture, the Major League Baseball began to simply, again, lag behind. They did not evolve with the times at hand. So that was a reason as well. Lastly, because the NBA and the NFL began to make the entrance into their leagues a little bit shorter, okay, relative to the NBA for the one and done, and if you're a junior in college, you can leave to go to the NFL, the time frame to become rich, all right, waned for the Major League Baseball. Because if any of you all don't know, even if you get drafted high in Major League Baseball, you have to go through the farm system, all right? And you have to spend 3 to 5 years essentially making pennies playing for teams in like Arkansas, right, in order to eventually make it to the major leagues. And at that point, only a few of these athletes make it. Now, when you do make it to Major League Baseball, you make it, all right? We see Mike Trout, for example, the Angels, who signed almost a $500 million contract. You know, that's unprecedented in sport, but that's a rarity. So you can go into the NFL and make at the most 20, 30 million. That's still better than going through a farm system and hoping. Okay? So those are some of the more U.S.-focused ways as to why Major League Baseball is struggling. All right? But what about the concept of globalization? All right? This is something that is, I think, as equal as other sports being more entertaining, but less talked about. Okay? So Latin American players make up almost 32% of Major League Baseball rosters, as opposed to less than 8% of African American players. Well, why is that? Okay? There is this thing called the boatload mentality. I don't know if you all have heard of this. It is something that Major League Baseball has been accused of being as unethical, amoral, but not illegal. Okay? So in Major League Baseball, you have to graduate high school in order to be drafted. You know, you can go in like that. But when it comes to, and of course, Major League Baseball has these sort of like little league games that kids play, you know, at a young age. But you're talking about Major League Baseball also going into Latin American countries and recruiting players at like the age of 8 or 9, as opposed to like 12. Okay? And so, and you pay, is actually, I would say it's fairly inexpensive, all right, to bring up Latin American players over any American player. All right? This is what they say is the boatload mentality. So let's take a look at that figure right there for a second. 4 or 20 at 25,000. Okay? The boatload mentality, rather, suggests that for every 4 U.S.-born player, we're going to split $25,000 to raise these players up in our system in the hopes that at least 2 of them will progress to be big-time players. All right? As opposed to 20 Latin American players, all right, and that money is split so much more low for the Latin American players because, again, they can't legally enter the game until a certain age. So you can spend the money on them as you please with the hopes that you can get at least 10 of those athletes to be, perennial all-stars, and the rest will just go back to their countries, mostly poverty-stricken. All right? But they picked the most poverty-stricken countries because Major League Baseball says, well, you should be thankful that we're coming into your communities, raising you up. Okay? So again, unethical, amoral, but not illegal. All right? That's the globalization of baseball. So new Commissioner Robert Manfred is really challenging owners and managers of teams to really consider the concepts of diversity and inclusion within the game of baseball. All right? So in this quote, he talks about the game, which is the game of Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente. All right? Where it's a game, where it's a sport and a business that needs to be more diverse, more socially conscious, right, as possible. All right? To progress the game and to move the game into the future. All right? But I believe that we all have sort of a surface level understanding of Jackie Robinson, and I just want to give a brief history about his role in the integration of the game of baseball. So to the right is Rube Foster, okay? And he was the founder and manager of the Negro Leagues, okay? So he started the Negro Leagues, of course, because of the segregation policies that were in Major League Baseball. He ran it for 6 years, okay? And in that 6-year time frame, it was the most entertaining sport in the country, okay? And at the time, it was taking away fans from Major League Baseball games, okay? And so to the left is Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey, who were the orchestrators of the integration of Major League Baseball. Now, at the time, when they were trying to work out Jackie Robinson into the game of baseball, again, the Negro Leagues were thriving, but Jackie Robinson was not the best Negro League player at the time. You had players like Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, who were dominant. And I believe it's either Satchel Paige or Josh Gibson, I have to look at my notes again, who hit well over 800 home runs, okay? But it was not counted because it's not a part of Major League Baseball stats, okay? But Branch Rickey sought out Jackie Robinson to integrate the game of baseball, partly because he knew how to handle white audiences, okay? And Jackie Robinson grew up in California, played at UCLA, and was familiar with the territory. And so Branch Rickey was like, well, we need somebody who was able to handle what could come, all right, with the integration of the game. And so Jackie Robinson was a great player, but in the Negro Leagues, he wasn't the best, okay? And so when they went in to integrate baseball, the Negro Leagues folded the following year because every Negro League player wanted in, okay? And so that's sort of the real story behind the concept of integration in baseball. So it wasn't necessarily to bring about this wonderful aspect of social change, but it was actually to exploit the Negro Leagues for its popularity. Okay? So again, how is Major League Baseball addressing the issue? So as I've mentioned, in 1989, they started the Reviving Baseball in Inner Cities program. Okay, and that's been going on ever since it started in Compton. The Urban Youth Academy, which was also started in Compton, was started in 2005 as a way to not only introduce the game to young inner city children, but to also provide educational opportunities for them and their parents. Okay, so it was all of these social kind of like responsibility causes that Major League Baseball has been trying to put together over the last few years, again, to introduce and orient African Americans back into the game. Okay? So Chaz Kellum is a very good friend of mine, and he was also the former director of diversity initiatives for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay? And when I was sitting in on one of my dissertation committee's classes, he was giving a presentation about the lack of diversity in the game. And if you know him, he has a very thick New York accent, like, hey, yo, Shaun, man, yeah, listen, man, we struggling, yo. And so, so he came to me and talked to me about their struggles. And I said, well, hey, why won't I just take the things that you're talking about and try to evaluate them and measure them to see what it is that you're having problems with? Because he said that they're all on social media. They have all of these social causes that they try to introduce young children in Pennsylvania and Ohio to, but they don't have any young followers on their social media accounts. I think their Twitter account only had about 12 followers, you know. And this is a Major League Baseball team, right? In the heart of Steel City. And so, again, we had a very honest conversation about the things that they probably needed. And so this was the beginning of my dissertation. All right, so it was initially supposed to be with this one team, evaluate their programs, sort of like in this engaged scholarship approach where I take the theoretical with his practical, combine it, and we get the work done. So he actually ended up leaving a little bit before I was able to get my dissertation off the ground. But he said that he figures that if they need it, a lot of teams need it. And so what I did was I reached out to the front offices of Major League Baseball, and I said, hey, I was doing some work with the Pirates on these social responsibility issues that you have. Do any of your other teams have problems? And they was like, oh, yeah, we do. We need all the help that we can get. We'll give you every team's contact. You know, we'll put this all together for you. Please just help us, you know. And so over a 6-month time frame, I contacted all of these diversity outreach program managers for Major League Baseball, and we'll get to what happened as the results here in a second. But again, this study is essentially framed after the concept of corporate social responsibility. And as you can see here from this definition, the focus of corporate social responsibility essentially says that businesses should not only be profitable, okay, but they should engage in some type of action to benefit society or any other various stakeholders that they work with. So employees, nonprofit organizations, what have you. And so where sport organizations come into play is that they're so entrenched with local communities that they partner with a bevy of organizations. So from nonprofits, so for example, with Pittsburgh, the Bayer Medical Corporation is headquartered there. So the team partners with them all the way down to local churches and schools. So you have various amounts of organizations working together for a social cause. And as it says here again, it's perceived obligations to employees, communities, the environment, and society as a whole That was the framework for this study that we put together. And so I was a little ambitious in using 2 theories in this work, but it actually worked. So not only was there this responsibility to society that this Major League Baseball needed to address, but they also were trying to build relationships with the African American community. And that's where this theory comes into play. Okay? So the goal through their social responsibility efforts was to, create this mutual understanding and benefit for interacting organizations and publics. Okay? So it was a way to build a fan base, a way to increase profits, but also a way to be more socially responsible. Okay? That's where the 2 theories marry and form a beautiful relationship. Or that was the attempt. All right? So my overarching question with Major League Baseball, with this particular study, well, the first part of the study was, despite Major League Baseball's social responsibility programs, reviving baseball in inner cities, and the Urban Youth Academy programs, what challenges do they still face in developing relationships and getting African Americans involved in the game? Okay? That was the premise of this work. So, of the diversity outreach program managers that I reached out to, 11 of them decided to participate. Because what the front office told me was that, yes, we want all of our programs to be evaluated, but we can't force these diversity outreach managers to do it. So they have to volunteer. So that's what happened. So 11 of the 30 Major League Baseball diversity outreach program managers in charge of the RBI and the UYA programs were interviewed for this particular study. Okay? So 9 were male and 2 were female. 4 were African American, 3 were white, and 2 were of Latinx descent. Both program managers, female program managers were African American. Okay? And so the length of time that they had worked in their specific roles ranged from 5 years to 20. Okay? So some of these people came in when a lot of these programs were initially created, or at least sometime after that. And some were still, of course, new to their roles, or relatively new. All right? So 3 themes from the research that was established with these particular studies. The main one was there was inconsistency in measuring success. Okay? And so to kind of give you a little bit of backdrop of how the interviews went, these were all Skype interviews, and they lasted from anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour and a half. Some were very lengthy in talking about the issues that were going on with their specific teams and Major League Baseball as a whole, and some were just like, I'm not talking about this, you know. But that's what it was. And so from theme 1, when we're talking about the inconsistency in measuring success, this is actually an overall issue between the front office of Major League Baseball and all 30 teams, because the front office says that we can't control what our teams do. We can just offer suggestions that they should be socially responsible. We can't make them be socially responsible. But we want to give them the opportunities to be as equal in their decision-making as possible. And what became the problem with that was when I was reaching out to some teams to keep them at their privacy, that there were states where there were more than one team. When I reached out to all the teams in this sort of like joint email, The front office called me immediately, like within 5 minutes. It was, no, 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 no. You can't do that, because one team doesn't necessarily want the other team to know what they're doing. But I'm like, aren't you all, fighting for the same causes? Is this a competition? So inconsistency in measuring success was number one. And so what you see here are just some exemplar quotes from the interviews. So where there were some people who just were like, I don't really want to talk about it, but they just said, there's no formal way of measuring success, okay? We just throw all these programs out there, but we don't really know if they work, all right? One team said just showing up for practice is a success for us. So very, very minuscule sort of expectations. And the one thing we try to do is try to find ways to quantify success. We have not figured out the best method to do that yet. Okay? So again, you're talking about the concepts of this major, major global organization that's putting these social responsibility tactics together and been doing it for over 20 years. 31 years. No way of measuring success to this day. All right? Theme 2, the lack of parental involvement. This one is very interesting because the diversity outreach managers that I talked to basically put all the blame on the parents. Okay? And so they were all about talking about this. As you can see, these are more lengthy quotes. And so one of the ones that got me was the first one. One of our challenges in the communities that we serve is the digital divide, okay? This is where families don't always have access to the internet. So how do we go about that to help that structure so that the parents, do have that? And so they were saying that the divide is the issue because they try their best to reach out to parents via email to say, hey, come, bring your children to these games. And so they say, well, if we can't reach them, then it's not our fault. So this is what many of the program managers are saying. The last one was a doozy too. One of the challenges is that we have a lot of single-parent homes. Those are just assumptions. We have some, of course, we know that there are some single-parent homes, but not everybody is from a single-parent home. We have a lot of homes where parents are working 2 or 3 jobs trying to make ends meet. If the ends don't meet, then the parents could lose their home, okay? So it's not our fault. The parents, these are, again, these sort of themes that these diversity outreach managers are saying that are the reasons as to why these kids are not showing up and why the black community is not coming there. They work too much. Okay. Lastly, is the concept of lack of trust. Okay. So this is where some of these diversity outreach managers are basically saying that, other games such as the NBA, all these things are taking over. They don't care about baseball anymore. So on the last one, the game of baseball doesn't represent how our kids play sports. I think if baseball loosens up some of the unwritten rules and allow players to be themselves and be a part of the game and making it fun, enjoyable, and celebratory, then I think our kids will have a love for it. Okay? So this is an actual outreach manager with a team that says that Major League Baseball needs to get with it, right? So they need to modernize. They need to establish themselves as a go-to place that the NBA and the NFL have done so already. All right? This is a good one, too. Baseball as a whole is not involved in understanding how to develop trust in any of these arenas. And by arenas, they mean the black community from youth from the parental perspective, and from the front office perspective. Because, again, there's a lack of diversity within the game of baseball itself from an administrative perspective. Okay. However, I do think that the Sunshine City RBI in the black community with our programming and special events is exposing our particular neighborhoods to people who act like them or talk like them. Okay? So even though they feel like their programs are, in a sense, exposing the young kids to what baseball is all about, it still goes back to, again, that inconsistency of success, right? Or measuring success that they don't know. So it's essentially them dumping out a whole bunch of programs, right, being socially responsible, knowing that they need to be socially responsible, right, but not really understanding how these programs are working. It's just to say we are being socially responsible by doing this. It's not our fault that people are not showing up, okay? That's basically what's being said here. So those were the results from my initial study, all right? That was part one of my series focusing on the African-American community and Major League Baseball. So what is next? I've already submitted my second study to this journal called the Journal of Sport Behavior, which now takes a look at the perceptions of the African-American community and what they say Major League Baseball needs to do in order to get them involved, okay? And the premise of that study was based off of the social responsibility efforts that Major League Baseball has put out there. So it was asking them questions of whether or not they were aware of what's going on with these social responsibility efforts, and would it bring them, or would it make them more involved in the game? So to kind of orient you to what Major League Baseball does besides teach the game of baseball with those programs, they also do things like dental screenings, okay, for young children. They hold individuals with accessibility issues days. Baseball stadiums are now becoming more accessible because they were not as accessible as NFL and NBA arenas, right? Prior to the last decade, okay? They are also holding specific things such as food drives. They are very keen when it comes to ethnic days. So they have like Jackie Robinson Day, Roberto Clemente Day, Native American Heritage Day. And you see a lot of these going on across various platforms with Major League Baseball teams. So they put these efforts out there, but they don't go into the communities and ask those prospective people what they need, okay, and what they want, exactly. So the goal for this second study was to do just that, at least with the African-American community. And so the results from this second study was that, yes, many African-American individuals who I surveyed from across the country, they say that they are aware of the programs, and they think that the programs are great for entertainment value. But it still does not make them want to become more involved, okay? And what I was able to find out from this study was that it was most of the younger participants who said this. All right, many of the older participants were like, hey, it's fine. We'll probably go to a game or two. But the crowd that Major League Baseball is trying to reach, they don't care. All right? They still have to evolve the game more in order for them to become more involved. Many people talked about the fact that they needed to lower ticket prices. Okay? Actually bring some of those players into their communities. Because what you don't see a lot and what many teams have expressed to me was that many of the black players are not seen in the same areas that RBI was started. There's the issue, okay? So the next goal beyond this study that I just completed was to also take a look at different aspects of fandom, okay? To look at what social responsibility avenues are more attractive to the community than others. And that will be the goal of the third study that I'm currently compiling, okay? That is the end of my presentation. Any questions?
So I have a lot of questions.
Sure.
It was really, really interesting. But I have one first question, which is, did you find any success stories? Were there any models that you could point to where, first of all, maybe they did figure out how they were going to measure success, or where the team was able to move the needle, and or not? And related to that, what about the minor leagues? Is anybody doing anything in the minor leagues where there might be less competition? Just wondering.
So, a great question. So, to answer your first question, there was one team, it's not U.S. based, that found a lot of success in at least engaging the community and not being afraid to actually go into communities and go sort of door to door and talk to the communities and ask them, why, what's going on. And they were not afraid to have players go into the communities and to bring in other prominent African American fans of the game to speak to the communities. They found a lot of success there. And again, that's the problem, is that that's only with one team, and the front office can't force, I'm not saying that you can't force people to do stuff, but the front office hasn't established a standard. And I think that's, again, why you see the inconsistency in the measuring of their success. To your second question, minor league baseball does a great job. They have a plethora of diversity outreach programs that are very, very solid. Again, Major League Baseball is already kind of floundering just overall when it comes to its fan base. So, for lack of better terms, even though minor league baseball has these programs, a lot of people simply don't care. And that's unfortunate.
Back here.
Oh, sorry.
Irvin Magic Johnson is now part owner of the LA Dodgers. Did you get an opportunity to interview him or someone from that staff?
I was able to talk to someone from that staff. And this is the issue where we run into, right? He is getting known much more now, or I should say equally to, for his business success as his NBA success. But that NBA success is the gold standard, pun intended, when it comes to Los Angeles, and the globe. So while I was able to talk to individuals from that staff, again, it's still your Lakers, your now the Rams, and even the Chargers, even though the Chargers don't even have a big fan base, are becoming more popular than your Dodgers, right? So it's going to take a long time for the game to evolve, but unfortunately, having his name attached, people are just still going to see Laker gold. Yes. Oh, sorry.
So this is what I'm curious about. At what age do you think that outreach really needs to happen to get kids and families involved? Because I'm wondering two things. That's one question. The second question is, do you think that I don't know. My son had a good friend who got drafted and was on I guess a farm team. Is that what they're called? Okay.
Right.
And it was a very hard life. And he tried for 3 years, and his parents were able to make it so that he could keep trying, and they had the means to get to his games. And he was in Arkansas for a while. He was, all through the South, and I think he wouldn't have stayed with it for the 3 years, and if he eventually left, if he hadn't had those visits from his family. So, are the baseball leagues, the farm teams, the minor leagues, is there a way to make it easier to succeed? Because it seems like a long time till you really get the prize.
Right.
Unlike, if you get the prize, unlike being 17 and leaving high school and going to a basketball arena and being successful.
Right.
So I don't know why it's so dramatically different.
So to answer your first question, I think baseball needs to at least consider what they're doing in like the Dominican, bringing up these players starting at like the age of 5, right? Because again, you have the little league teams and stuff, and you see these tournaments all throughout the U.S. But again, there's also sort of this different mentality to make it in more of your Latin American areas than here, because you're talking about in those little league teams, those are pay for play, right? So it's about that affordability. To go into the next one, you're now getting into the concepts of upward mobility, right? There was this study that I read. There was a part of the literature review of this that says that even though young black children are academically gifted, as of now, they still see sport as their best way out of certain communities. Even those who live in more prosperous communities still feel the same way, because there is not only this level of fantasy attached to making it to the pros, there's also, again, this level of what I talked about earlier, peer pressure. If you're not a part of the cool sport, then there you go. There were so many talented black baseball players from my city alone, Pine Bluff, Arkansas. One player in particular, his name is Basil Shabazz. If he would have stuck with baseball, you would know that name. He would be in the Hall of Fame like right now. I don't know if any of you know who Torii Hunter is. Torii Hunter played Major League Baseball for years for the Minnesota Twins. It's from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So I'm telling you, Pine Bluff, Arkansas was the place but Basil Shabazz and Torii Hunter were actually really good friends. And Basil Shabazz was leaps better than Torii Hunter. Everybody knew who Basil Shabazz was because everybody remembers when he was 15 years old, the St. Louis Cardinals came down to scout him. But he went to play football instead. He broke his neck playing football and never played sports again. He was, of course, he survived, but he turned to a life of crime and because he lost his identity, right? But was absolutely, I want to say that Basil Shabazz was probably the best player to come out of Arkansas ever. I mean, we saw him when I was in the city as a little kid, racing football players in jeans. And back in the South, we used to wear these boots called Eastland boots. Everybody used to wear these like really hard construction worker boots and a button-down shirt run a 4.3 in that. This guy was amazing, but could not, it's Pine Bluff is the hood. You're looking for upward mobility now. Baseball takes too long, and that's the problem. Yes.
So I always thought that the reason that baseball was kind of lost over like football and basketball was because it's a slow game,
Mm-hmm.
and that we are very much into a quick video bite type of society over the last few decades.
Right.
Do you think that has something to do with it too? That just
the NBA and the NFL have done a masterful job in using the media to usher forth their platform. When the Fab Five in Michigan, that's, again, when late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, when you started to see just the NBA sort of perpetuate the media. There's this documentary. I don't know if you've all heard of this. It's called School, The Price of College Sports. And it's a documentary that talks about how the NCAA was formed, why the term student athlete was created, and how it sort of hindered other sports from growing, and how it, sort of like galvanized the growth of basketball and football. And so just to give you a little bit about it, so the concept of student athlete was created, in a sense. It was created to prevent athletes, yes, from getting paid, and becoming unionized. But the real reason student athlete, the term was created, because they did not want the athletes to sue if they got injured. Okay? And so it talked about how this one marketing guru came into like college bookstores and said, hey, the NBA is growing. The popularity is growing. These college basketball players are good. If you sell their merchandise in your bookstores, you'll start making a lot of money. And that's how it grew to like the big time thing that it is, to the point now to where, of course, we have the laws set in place to where athletes will eventually start getting paid for their likeness here over the next couple of years. So again, it's the media, it's the growth of the other sports being more of an entertainment value than, say, Major League Baseball is right now. Yes, absolutely. And I guess in a way, a better system for these athletes to become richer quicker, because the other two sports just allow them to do that.
I might have a related question to that, actually. As far as like trying to make baseball more hip, and to the people you interviewed who said that maybe baseball needs to like loosen up its unwritten rules. Can you give some of those examples of those unwritten rules that they were suggesting, like?
So it goes back to, and he made a joke, but he was very clever with it. I think Chris Rock is always great with that. That the game is played the right way, right? So in a sense, the proper way. Whereas, you get penalized in the NFL now for like strong hits, illegal hits to the quarterback, but you still see it every now and then. It skirts the edges of perfection. The NBA as well, with a lot of the fights and the brawls and all the stuff that you see. But one of the unwritten rules is just the game was just super slow, okay? And they're trying to change that now. You're beginning to see the home run era of baseball, where teams are scoring a lot of points, hitting a lot of home runs. And the thing about it is, Chris Rock was saying that at least let the players celebrate if they're going to hit a home run. They didn't do that at first. So typically, he said you would see just a player hitting a home run, putting the bat down, running around the bases, and high-fiving his teammates. But he says you need to see somebody at least point at the fans and talk trash, you know. Right. But he was saying that again, because of just the establishment of baseball as to how it was built institutionally, you probably won't see that. But those are some of the unwritten rules he was talking about.
So I'm wondering, didn't something similar happen in basketball as well? Like, there's a proper way to play basketball. You shouldn't slam dunk the ball.
Slam dunking was not popular until you saw your Wilt Chamberlains of the world kind of coming in. Lou Alcindor, who's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar now. Of course, doing this, Dr. J. You know, now it's the slam dunk contest is real. You know, so the game has evolved.
Anybody else? If not, with that, can you all please help me in giving a round of applause to Dr. Shaun Anderson?
Appreciate it.
Thank you again.